Hello, one and all. My name is Ronald Forbes. I am a three-time Olympian in the sport of track and field, representing the beautiful Cayman Islands. And thank you. And making what seemed to be the impossible possible is something I've done my entire life. You all have done it as well. Whether you choose to believe that or not. See, at some point in your life, some place, some time, something had to seem impossible. And until you decided to go out and challenge what seemed to be the impossible, it always remained impossible. See, we're a combination of what we see and what we think, then how we act upon those thoughts. Say, for instance, I wanted you to simply jump over a pothole that was in the middle of the street to get to the next side. Many of us would simply just hop right over it. It's not a really impossible task to do. But if I wanted you to, say, cross the gap between two buildings, and I wanted you to do it walking over a tight wire, many of us would never dare take the first step. Why, I ask? For the simple fact of failing and falling. See, this task became a little bit more impossible when we started to act upon what we thought, based on what we saw. And sometimes in combating the impossible, we have to learn to bridge the mental gap of what the impossible is and what the possible is. But in the process of building that mental bridge, we as humans tend to learn to build walls first. Walls in terms of stuff that hold us back, simply out of nowhere. And it stops us from achieving anything great. And these walls sometimes are comprised of bricks. Bricks in terms of fears, doubts, opinions, and they're often cemented together by excuses. And until we stop building these walls that simply hold us back from doing such great things, we often end up living a life that is far less greater than we were ever destined to live. I guess that's the story of my life. If you were to tell this young little boy that 20-something odd years ago that he would one day become an Olympian, he would first look at you like you were absolutely crazy. Then he would pretty much just run away. See, my mind frame back then is completely different than it is now. I was a person that allowed other people's fears, their doubts, their opinions to somehow factor into my daily life. And I started to realize that by me having that incorporated into my daily life, I never really challenged much. And with me not challenging much, nothing really got accomplished. But that sort of all changed one day during a PE class when my PE teacher, Mr. Gary, took up a discus and he threw it onto the field. And he dared someone, anyone in the class, to surpass where he threw his. Now, of course, you're 12 years old, so everyone thought that that was impossible. He's a grown man. But for some reason that day, I didn't see it as impossible. So I took up a discus and I threw mine onto the field. And not only did it surpass where he threw his, it surpassed where I thought I was going to throw mine as well. Now, after being told that I had to show up at the next day's evening practice, which I was clearly against because I didn't like running, I didn't like jumping, I didn't like track and field, I didn't like the sport, period. However, I decided to step out and to challenge that as well. Right there was where my track and field career got its kickstart. Now, after being a discus and shot put thrower for a while, yes, those were my first events, I slowly started to gravitate towards the one event that many people shy away from. That event is the event of the hurdles. Why do many people shy away from the hurdles? Simply for the fact, once again, of failing and falling. You see, if I had $1 for every single time that someone's told me their story of, well, Ron, one time I tried the hurdles and I hit the hurdle, I fell, so I never did it again, I would be a rich individual. See, it's the one event that didn't allow me a comfort zone. It challenged who I was on the track, and it challenged who I was off of the track. Now, going into high school, instead of doing the 100 hurdles, because I got a little bit older, I had to do the 400 hurdles. And when I got into high school, I started to envision track and field as this whole other bigger and greater entity, not just simply just running. I started to see the possibilities in it. I started to see one of the possibilities of track and field as a way for me to get from where I was to where I wanted to go, hence a bridge. And in that journey, I wanted to go to school. I wanted to one day somehow envision myself being an Olympian. But in order to make any of those things possible, I had to get better. My performances simply were not good enough. Therefore, I had to train harder. And that's exactly what I set out to do. I set out on a mission in order to achieve those two things, going to school and trying to be an Olympian. So, I got up every single morning at 4:45, catch the bus from North Side all the way to the airport malfunction junction. And from there, I would jog from that malfunction junction with a backpack on my back and a duffel bag across my shoulders all the way to the Truman Bodden Sports Complex, getting there around maybe 6:30. I would train from 6:30 until 8:45, then it was off to school all day. And after school was finished, from 3 o'clock until 5:30, it was back to training again. In a nutshell, for me, this was my high school experience. Needless to say, it was not easy, and maintaining that jerry curl did not make it any easier. But during that time, a transition took place. I got better, I got faster, I got stronger. And one of those seemingly impossible tasks that I set out to do became possible. That was, I attained a scholarship to go off to college right out of high school. And man, was I excited. But right then, life didn't throw me a bridge, it threw me a wall. In 2002, I had applied for my student visa, and I was ultimately denied. I was sent back home and told that it would be an entire year before I could reapply, ultimately losing that scholarship offer. So, for 3 weeks, I quit track and field. I decided it was too much work, too much risk, for too little reward. But I was encouraged, after a while, to come back, to try to cross that bridge from where I was to where I wanted to go one last time. So I did. But high school was over now. I was into the real world. I had to find work. So after scouring about for a bit, I eventually landed my first job ever as an adult at A.L. Thompson's Appliance Center as an appliance delivery personnel. And there at the Appliance Center, I continued to work. I continued to study. I continued to strive even harder. And after a year or so of working there and competing during that time, I got better. And I regained that scholarship offer. And in the end of 2003, I reapplied for that student visa, and this time I was approved. And in January of 2004, I was off to Bacone College in Muskogee, Oklahoma. Now, judging by the looks in your faces, some are wondering, well, where is that? That is the same question I asked myself. It's pretty much in the middle of nowhere. It was not the best of schools. It was not my first choice. However, I had accomplished something that I thought was impossible, which was to get into school. And there at Bacone, with it not being my first choice, it was simply an ace that I had to play like a king. I continued to work. I continued to study. I continued to compete. And just after my first semester at a track meet in Mexico, life threw me one of the biggest bridges in its most simplest forms that today I've ever received in my entire life. In the simple form of a business card that was given to me one morning at the airport by the then head coach of Florida International University. I simply took the card, stuck it in my wallet, thought nothing of it. When I returned back to Bacone for my second semester, or the start of my second semester, I learned that the head coach had left, so was 75% of the team had gone with him. Once again, I faced the scenario of being on my own, completely alone. Was there with no family, no friends, and 2 weeks after Hurricane Ivan. But I continued to stay hopeful. I continued to train, sometimes even on my own, in the snow, in the heat, in the rain. And ultimately thinking one day that this was not how I envisioned 4 years of college to go. This wasn't the plan. This was not how I envisioned this. I decided to step out on faith. And after digging up in my wallet, I found that card. And on my way to class one morning, I decided to send an email to the address on that card. And 20 minutes later, I had a reply. He'd remembered who I was and what time I had performed. And just so happens, right then he was looking for a 400-meter hurdler. And there I was. And after conversing a while, at the very last email that we ever sent was some words I'd never forget. With your times, I could offer you a full scholarship to Florida International University, a Division I program. Needless to say that I accepted, and once the paperwork was done, I was out, gone. And in January of 2005, I arrived at Florida International University, where everything completely changed. You see, for a time being, this coach had the bright idea that I was a perfect fit for an alternate leg on the shuttle hurdle relay, going to Penn Relays that year. I've never done this event in my entire life. So he said, hey, Ronald, show up to 2 evening practices and we'll see how it works. So I did. I showed up to the 2 evening practices, not 2 weeks, just 2 practices. And at the upcoming weekend, he had the other bright idea to throw me into my first race. Nervous was not the word. I stared down at 10 hurdles thinking that this was not going to end good, and this was completely impossible. But the gun went off, and I survived. And just 2 weeks later, he had the other bright idea again to throw me into my second race. But something changed in between week 1 and week 2. I didn't look at the event as being impossible anymore because I'd done it the first time. So when I lined up, I knew I could get it done. It might not have been the prettiest, but I knew I could get it done. And this time, not only did I survive, I became the fastest hurdler in the school. From there, it only got better. I continued to get faster, I continued to work harder, I continued to train even harder every single day. I made a couple of national teams, broke a couple of national records, even took down a conference title here and there. But for some reason, something still existed deep inside of me saying that I know I'm better than what I am at this present moment. But change was slow to come. But then in 2008, with a change of mind came a big change in performance. I stopped looking at life and the event as one of impossibilities and barriers and stuff that I couldn't do, and stopped concentrating and compiling those in a pile, and start looking at the things that I could do and really honing in and focusing on all of those possibilities. And in 2008, it changed my performance drastically, simply with the change of mind. In just 5 weeks of my 2008 collegiate track and field season getting underway, my times in the 60-meter hurdles went from a 7.98, an event that I've never done, to a 7.58 in just a matter of 5 weeks. I'd ultimately gone from someone that could barely make a conference final to, by the end of that particular indoor season that year, being ranked as the 15th fastest hurdler in the world in just those 5 weeks. From there, I continued to ride this momentum and enjoy the ride all along the way. And at the very last track meet I had as a collegiate athlete, the NCAA championships, in the semifinal round, I accomplished something that I thought that was completely impossible when this journey got started. I ultimately ended up qualifying and competing in my first Olympics that summer, which was Beijing in 2008. Since then, I've gone on to accomplish more impossible tasks, such as competing in 2 more Olympics, London 2012 and Rio 2016, with a host of other world championships and other major championships along the way. Some of those championships I've been a semifinalist and a finalist in. See, none of this would have been possible had I not stepped out and challenged what seemed to be the impossible. We are the ultimate builders of our future by what we are faced with and our mental approach in combating each and every task. Never take yourself to the court of public opinion, find yourself guilty, and ultimately sentence yourself to a life that is far less greater than what you were ever destined to live. If something always seems impossible and you never challenge that, impossible is what it shall always remain. But if you think for 1 second that it is possible and you decide to go out and step out on faith and challenge that, then get ready for the great things that are about to happen in your life. Thank you.